What's going on, guys? Meteorologist Jonathan Kegas back with you alongside News 6 meteorologist David Nazario. We are coming at you live on News 6 Plus, clickorlando.com, the News 6 YouTube channel, and the Just Weather YouTube channel. Welcome, everybody, joining the stream. We have some developments really over the past couple of hours and really over the last hour, unfortunate developments, at least in terms of the intensity of this storm. We're going to get all into that first and foremost. Sorry about being late. There's some comments in there. I know David on his page said that we were going to be on at 8:15. I threw the thing for a very, very big time inception loop, and it was just a crazy thing that we had to go through. So my bad on that. But wanted to hop on here to give you the latest. What's going on, David?
And not much, Jonathan. Just got done over there on the Weather Center Nazario page. Lots to talk about. And as you've already alluded to, this system is, dare I say, strengthening and it's not wasting any time.
It's not, and it's crazy how I guess how quickly things can change. A couple of hours ago, we were talking just before we got on. Its center and mid-level center kind of came apart. For those that don't know tropical meteorology, or at least the dynamics and science behind it, when you're talking about a tropical system, I always like to say it's got to be like a pancake. You don't want your pancakes falling off. You want them nice and stacked. How you get them at like IHOP or something. This is not sponsored by IHOP. Just really like their pancakes. But nonetheless, you don't want to have your pancakes falling off the plate. So it likes to be stacked with its low level center and its mid level center. We weren't seeing that. And until those kind of co locate, it can't really strengthen and take advantage of the energy that's there. We had something, I think it was Debbie. That was the deal with Debbie. It could never really fend off some of the drier air, which was a good thing to really get its core ready to become that big heat engine.
No, exactly. That's why Debbie looked a whole horrid mess as it came off of Cuba, past the Keys, and then up our west coast into the Big Bend. If you all remember, especially for us Floridians, it was a very elongated north to south system. It never really quite closed off and or aligned optimally in the vertical until just before landfall. So again, it was another situation where we Floridians lucked out with this system dragging its heels until the very last second. Otherwise, it could have gone downhill very quickly.
It could have. It could have. And one of the things we're watching here, if you guys were watching TV, we just hopped on real quick on the News 6 TV side of things to bring you the 8 o'clock advisory. And certainly the changes we've noticed are for the stronger. The pressure down a few millibars. We have a Hurricane Hunter aircraft in there now. So it's going to be interesting to see what that finds once it goes back to the center. But when the pressure drops, the wind goes up. And that's what we've just saw here. Not rapid just yet, but we at least think that the strengthening process has begun.
Yes, I fully agree. My big concern is we're going to wake up tomorrow and this will have achieved hurricane status. And I'm sure you'll agree, Jonathan, if it does so actually attain that intensity threshold by 8, if not 11 a.m. tomorrow, then we might want to start considering the higher end solutions that we've seen in some of our intensity guidance.
Yeah, and we'll take a look at some of those hurricane models in just one second. A little bit later on in this episode, we're going to roll until about 9 o'clock tonight. But first, I want to kind of go through the cone, and we're going to break down some of the impacts for Central Florida, county by county, and then we're going to have more on that on the 11 o'clock newscast. If you happen to be tuning in from the greater Central Florida area, wanted to show you this, and this is the kind of thing that David and I were talking about last night. How kind of throw the cone out the window at this point. The forecast is pretty much spot on. It really has not gone unchanged track wise for the last 3 days, give or take. I mean, it's been a very, very consistent forecast, and it really hasn't moved much. We're going to anticipate wobbles, so there's some uncertainty as to the exact landfall point. But that orange color on your screen, I overlaid that. That is going to be the wind field that the hurricane hunters are highlighting. That's a tropical storm force wind field. So everything is east loaded. And unfortunately, when you have a storm to your west, that means that a lot of the peninsula is going to observe tropical storm force winds. And this is what David was talking. We're going to go back first. So there's 2 o'clock in the afternoon, expected to become a Cat 1. If we have that happen earlier, before it goes through the extremely warm Yucatan Channel, That's what he was talking about the potential to reach the upper end here. I wanted to also show you this. This is kind of what the Hurricane Center is doing new this year with their cone. If you would go to weather.gov and find the hurricane plots, um, they're overlaying the watches and warnings over the cone. And with this illustration, you can see why. Because if you would just look at the cone, you might be like, all right, hey, Orlando's looking pretty good. Palm Bay is looking pretty good. And relatively speaking, yeah, that's going to be the case. We're talking about tropical storm conditions. We do have to watch out for a severe weather threat. I'll show you some of the severe weather parameters in just 1 second. But you can clearly see that even with the cone being out of Central Florida per se, um, there's still those tropical storm impacts coming to most of the peninsula. And then, of course, the hurricane conditions, David.
Oh yeah, definitely. I agree, Jonathan. That's what I was alluding to in discussing a little bit in more in detail over on my Weather Center Nazario page. A lot of folks have been mentioning how big this system is, but we also have to take into account the general physics with tropical cyclones. So we have the pressure gradient force around the entire hurricane. And that is what's likely to produce the tropical storm conditions as far to the east as you can see here, Osceola County, Orange County, parts of Sumter, Polk County, even though they're in the heart of the Central Florida Peninsula. However, given the nature and how these systems just literally spin cyclonically, you're going to have the strongest winds still closest to the center. So we should be able to avoid those hurricane level impacts, let alone sustained hurricane impacts into the peninsula, but we're not out of the woods by far. The entirety of Florida, from our viewing area to the Keys to Miami, Fort Lauderdale, all the way into Georgia and as far west as Pensacola, we'll know that there's a tropical cyclone out there.
No doubt about that. I want to show you the latest computer forecast. I'm just doing some switching around on the sources. But again, a very pretty great job by the human forecasters and the computer forecasters as well. Initially, again, the European was out to lunch. We talked about that. These two, don't pay attention to any of those two models. Those are just some of the climatology ones. But these guys here, really focusing on the central and western Big Bend. Unfortunately, that puts it very close to the Idalia landfall. Perry took it on the chin with Idalia last year, and we're going to be right back in that same kind of area again, unfortunately. So not the best for our friends in the Big Bend.
Not at all. And that's been the song and dance, it seems like, excuse me, even since last year. We had Idalia very end of August. We had Debbie very beginning of August, this hurricane season. And now it looks like we're going to receive Helene into that same general area, God forbid, as a much stronger entity than we saw with Debbie earlier, a little over a month ago. And that's why I hope, and both Jonathan and I and the rest of the WKMG team urge you guys to take this fairly serious. It's not just this storm in of itself, it's the fact that this is now repetition. We already had a hurricane this season landfall in that same general area, and it marinated up there for a couple days, coupled with a stationary boundary that just continued to dump buckets of rain across the southeast. So we're not ready for a tropical system, let alone a hurricane, let alone a major hurricane. So please listen closely to your local authorities, your law enforcement, emergency management personnel, and listen very carefully for those evacuation orders because this isn't a joke. This is round two now for all intents and purposes. And we're looking at times two of the potential impacts if this system does get going, like NHC and the rest of our forecast models are indicating.
That's correct. Yeah, and I wanted to show you this, the tropical storm force. You were talking about the opportunity for this thing to be wide, and it's likely going to be wide. And you see there the percentage is pretty much through the I-4 corridor of tropical storm force winds greater than 30% to observed sustained winds that's greater than 39 miles an hour inland. Here's how I think this is a good representation, David, of how this storm could play out, at least in terms of the timeline and everything. Getting going with some of the first signs tomorrow at 8, 9 o'clock into the evening, maybe a few stray thunderstorms along the coast. Those feeder bands or that flow out ahead of the main storm. So it's kind of like the indirect push of moisture. And then there we go. They're the meat and potatoes of the thing. early on Thursday morning, still most of the peninsula doing okay. The Panhandle starting to get some heavier rain, Big Bend as well, and then it kind of spirals back in. So I think the worst of this really starts to ramp up Thursday afternoon into Thursday evening, leading up to landfall in the Big Bend. From a Central Florida perspective, this is what we're going to have to watch. Look at all those little kidney bean shaped guys there that are hanging out isolated. Dirty side of the storm. If you were with us earlier this evening on WKMG News 6, Samara Kokinos was breaking down what the heck the dirty side of the storm is. And it's essentially the maximized wind shear area. And anything that gets going and anything that's strong enough to kind of break through and take advantage of the turning of the winds with height will have the potential to spin. And that's, I think, our main concern in Central Florida, at least in my opinion.
Nope, I'm completely on board with that. The localized heavy rainfall is likely to produce some urban and roadway flooding. That is also going to be the next right up there in the top of the docket in terms of our interior Florida threats. And for those of you who have been out there hearing the comparisons between Ian, Charlie, etc., I lived firsthand through Hurricane Charlie. And one thing that I know Jonathan and I will emphasize, and the rest of the WKMG team will emphasize, is please watch these feeder bands as they rotate through Florida. I distinctly recall it was still hours away before making landfall Charlie back in 2004. And immediately, first feeder band came through, tornado warning instantly in my town of Kissimmee, knocked out power before the storm was even ashore. So it goes to show that as this system is on approach and even thereafter, after it has moved beyond our viewing area, we don't want to take our foot off the gas. We want to remain vigilant, kind of keep our head on a swivel, throughout this entire process. And that's what we're here for.
No doubt about that. So there we go with the supercell potential. And essentially, what we're looking at now, it's scientifically called helicity, but these are kind of your rotation tracks here. And what it's looking at the low level spin in the atmosphere. So where you see these kind of tracks, it's the model picking up on where we have those areas of spin that the storms would be able to take advantage of. And you see them just kind of grow a little bit through Thursday evening. So I think, again, as we're watching the quote unquote main event where the worst of the worst is going to be closer to the Big Bend or in the Big Bend, we'll have that tornado threat here through Central Florida, that localized flood threat with some of that heavy rain sliding through as well. So just some things to keep in mind as we go forward over the next 48 hours, give or take.
That's another thing too, ladies and gentlemen, is this thing's going to be on our back door quick. That's the nature of these close to home systems, is once they're on the board and people are talking about it, it's usually within 24, 48 hours, if not max, if we're lucky, 72 hours before we really begin to feel the effects of it.
Yeah, I'm going to try to load up another source to kind of go county by county. So right now we're taking a look at the satellite, and David, the presentation again. It's just all unfortunately. I want to always like say unfortunate when we say something looks good. It's not good for us. It's good for the storm, and we don't like to see this stuff because, as David mentioned, if we get a core to develop relatively fast over the next 12 hours, it might look way, way different in the morning, unfortunately.
Very much so. And it pains me personally being away from you guys. I echoed it over on my channel during my live stream, and I'm going to say it again for all of you who may not be super familiar with my presence on the Just Weather and the WKMG platform. Being away from Florida, not being in the trenches with WKMG, with my family, friends, everyone out there, as the system comes through, it irks me. So please make no mistake, if there's certain verbiage being thrown around by either one of us or other sources you may pay attention to, this is a serious situation. And it irks me to be one of those guys who can talk safely from states away. I'm not usually like that, but military orders, I can't do anything about it. So that's why we're here, at least trying to cover down digitally as best as we can.
No, you're doing a great job, and again, thank you for what you're doing as well. It's obviously important work to be up there, but I know how bad you want to be back here with us, and more importantly, your family. Also, want to point out too what we're looking at, that big black box down there. That was light a little bit ago. Obviously, we've lost daylight, but we have a cool new feature to bring you there. That was St. Mark's Lighthouse. That's right near Apalachicola, again, right on the bay there. And we're going to be able to bring you the kind of the live look as this hurricane comes in all over Florida and parts of the deep south. That is from the help of WeatherStem as well. So we're using their cameras and some of their weather information that they have stationed across Florida and elsewhere to kind of bring you what is actually happening in real time. If you leave the area, you can tune into us. We're going to be on here as much as possible over the next 48 hours to again give you the best information that we possibly can. So rest assured for that.
Absolutely, Jonathan. I completely agree. Let's go ahead and try to dive into some of the storm surge forecasts and get that county by county going. I know we had a lot of folks on the previous stream asking for specific questions. Let's try to nail that down, at least to the best of our ability, even though we are still technically in the preliminary stages of Helene's life cycle.
So here's what we have. We'll start with Marion County. And again, the closer you are to the Gulf Coast of Florida, certainly, again, the Big Bend, you guys need to be making sure that you are finishing preparations and listening to local officials for the imminent major hurricane landfall Thursday afternoon into the evening. We're going to focus on part of the Florida Peninsula now, the central Florida Peninsula. And I think the worst of the weather, will start to go downhill a little bit Wednesday evening, but really Thursday afternoon and evening is going to be the worst. I think from a gust standpoint, in terms of from the storm itself, got it at 45 to 65 mile per hour gusts. Of course, that tornado threat, and then 4 to 6 inches of rain. We'll take you to Sumter County now, and this is where we're going to still see, relatively speaking, some elevated impacts. Again, tropical storm warning in effect. Worst of the weather, same time frame. Gusts about 35 to 55 miles an hour. That tornado threat is still going to be there, and then the rainfall will be about 3 to 5 inches. On to Orange County, and we're going to have much more of these county by county impacts. If you're watching from the greater Central Florida area, please tune in tonight at 11 o'clock. We're going to hit this hard so you guys know exactly what to expect Wednesday into Thursday. Just wanted to give some of that, and then we'll talk about some of the crazy storm surge forecasts coming out. But for Orange County, Seminole County, Osceola, and Polk, really about 30 to 50 mile per hour gusts. That tornado threat is still going to be there, as we saw with the model and the environment. And then rainfall a little bit lower, about 1 to 3 inches. And certainly there's room for the rainfall on a localized scale to overachieve a little bit if you get under one of those outer bands. Deep tropical moisture typically allows things to really, really to overachieve some of the expectations there. So that possibility is there. But nonetheless, that's kind of like a little rundown of what we're seeing there. And again, we're going to go full tilt. We're going to stream again at about 10 o'clock. And then we'll be on at News 6 at 11 in Central Florida. I'm going to bring up the storm surge graphic now, David, if you want to talk about what you're seeing on satellite as I find that graphic and pull it up.
Of course, yeah, absolutely. And also, for those of you who may be watching and we didn't hit your local area county by county, don't forget that you can technically more or less copy and paste some of those threats over, figuratively speaking. If Orange County is expecting X, Y, and Z, and you're from Osceola or a little further to the north of that, you're likely to see very similar conditions. It's not like there's going to be a ton of differentiating between areas in the Central Florida area, but just remember, closer to the West Coast, you're going to want to add a little bit more intensity to those impacts. Closer to the East Coast, Volusia, Brevard, further up towards St. Augustine, Jacksonville, and down towards the South, you're going to see a little less. So hopefully that makes sense. We will, as Jonathan said, be breaking down more of the finite details as we get closer in time tonight. Through the day tomorrow, we're going to have everything dialed in, and then we're going to be riding this thing out on Thursday. Satellite imagery, Jonathan, if you wouldn't mind clicking back over there real quick. The one thing I want to bring up on this satellite is yes, this is a very expansive storm. However, we saw this with Francine. So make no mistake, it is going to be a big system, but I like to look at these these tropical cyclones sometimes like amphibians or almost like reptiles. After a certain period of time, if they get some dry air, some shear in there, and it throws their symmetry off, they'll sometimes shed excess clouds, excess thunderstorms, and they'll lose that to further consolidate and try to tighten up their center of circulation. That's what sadly gets them stronger. We want to see them more broad, more disorganized, more expansive, because the nature of the tropical cyclone, the name is, in the storm itself, not talking Helene, just, the system in general, they want to be very tightly wrapped, very small. The smaller systems tend to be a little bit more treacherous. These broad systems, depending on how strong they can get, naturally will be a beast of their own. But in this case, if you notice, we have a lot of thunderstorms up over the Bahamas, over central Cuba, Cayman Islands, even getting as far east as Jamaica. I would not anticipate that that is the true eastern extent of Helene. We will likely see this system reorganize and reorchestrate its overall thunderstorm configuration or just look, to the naked eye for us before it makes landfall. It is still going to be a pretty big system in comparison to like Andrew or Charlie back in the day. But make no mistake, we're not looking at it a system that's going to be the size of the whole Caribbean Sea or the Gulf of Mexico as it moves ashore. So just want to put that out there as well. That's something I've been seeing trending all over social media, that this is going to be a humongous system. Yes, but maybe not in the way that they're alluding to or trying to kind of spice it up a little bit, if you will, just to try to alleviate some of the tension. It's not going to be major hurricane conditions from Louisiana to Bermuda. That's just not how these systems operate from a physical perspective. When we look at it on the most basic level, if you will, it's just that's not how spin works in the atmosphere.
Well said. All right. So when you see the purple on this map, you're talking crazy stuff. And we're going to start with the worst. And we're going to go down. Pretty much the entire Gulf Coast of Florida is highlighted under storm surge warnings. If you were, show of hands, if you were living on the Gulf Coast of Florida and heard your phone go off, post in the comments if you did that. And while you're posting that, if you're finding this information helpful and you want to stay updated through the duration of the storm and whatever else hurricane season brings, do us a favor and hit that subscribe button. We would appreciate that. We're growing the weather community here, and we love your feedback, and we love having the conversation here with you guys, kind of letting you in and see how the forecast process goes and what we're doing to be transparent with you guys, and just to see all that data that we're crunching, all those numbers and stuff like that. So if you're finding this helpful and I don't want to say the word enjoying, but just the weather talk and the science, meteorology, and just kind of learning what's going on, hit that subscribe button for us. All right, so here we go. Let me change this map just a little bit so you can actually see what's going on. This is some crazy stuff right here. So you see the storm surge right along the panhandle or the Big Bend of Florida, just southwest of Perry. Off the top of my head, I don't know what the surge Adalia was to compare it. But you see it there, the model forecast wants more than 18 feet of water. And David, you had a great description of what storm surge actually is yesterday in the stream. We have nearly 3,000 people on the live feed right now. Explain to them, if they missed the live stream, what storm surge is. I do think a lot of people don't know what that is.
And I agree. I think storm surge, the terminology is so easily tossed around, whether it be from NHC or other National Weather Service, local authorities, and it's not done, the wrong way. It's just the interpretation can be a little difficult sometimes. So in layman's terms, when you see values like 15 to 18 feet, 18 plus feet, it's essentially how much the water is forecast to simply rise. Storm surge is not wave height, it's not swell height, it's not the winds being pushed ashore. It's literally surging the water level. That's why it's called a surge, because it's almost, if you will, like a big dome of water that's pulled in by the extreme low pressures found in a tropical system, and that dome of water gets pushed inland by the storm as it comes up above ground level. That's another thing too that goes into a surge forecast, is our level at, our sea level and your level above ground level. That's two different variables: mean sea level and above ground level, or AGL for us military weather folks. And in this case, this would indicate between 15 to 18 feet above ground level, because unfortunately, we all know that Florida is as flat could be. There really isn't a whole lot of rolling hill or terrain out there to keep us away from flood prone areas, especially in a geographic location like the Big Bend, that almost lopsided horseshoe look. So that's essentially storm surge, ladies and gentlemen, is just how much the water is going to rise. Then you have other variables like wind direction, wind speed, how long the system hangs out for. That's another kicker, is how fast or how slow is it moving? Will the water rush inland? Will it be a slow buildup? Kind of the pros and cons here. With a fast moving Helene, we'll likely see the waters come up quick, but they should, Lord willing, recede quick.
Absolutely. One thing I want to touch on too, and this kind of goes, one of the last points we'll make on this particular live stream. And again, we'll be doing updates through the duration of the storm, and really a long one as we wait for landfall on Thursday. So again, if you're finding this information helpful and want to be a part of that live stream, please hit that subscribe button. We would appreciate it. Give it a thumbs up. It allows YouTube to push it out to more people to get some credible information, because as David mentioned earlier, there's a lot of the misinformation and just, okay, we're going to go play this model run by model run. And all that stuff. Anyway, excuse me, losing my voice. I want to make this a point. If anybody's watching from the north side of Tampa Bay, post that in the comments. Because even though this thing is staying way offshore, we're not taking the eye wall in Tampa, St. Pete, Clearwater, Bradenton. We're not taking the eye wall. But because this thing is so big, it is going to be pushing a ton of water into Tampa Bay. And you see it right there from Oldsmar into Tampa. We're talking 6 to 9 foot storm surge. So again, that definition that David just described there, we could be talking about some big time flooding on the north side of Tampa Bay due to the fact that the water is being pushed. And that's on top of any kind of freshwater flooding. We know what happened with Debbie, where we got those training thunderstorms off of a couple of those really gnarly bands. And we got what I think we broke a daily record in Sarasota for all that flooding. So just keep that in mind, that impacts are always felt. Sometimes significant impacts are always felt outside and far away from the center of circulation, but some big time surge there. We'll take you further into Fort Myers. I know we have a lot of people around Cape Coral, Port Charlotte. And again, we don't foresee, I know there's a lot of people still on this chat too, talking about Ian, and we'll end the stream with some synoptics. But David, you just want to talk about the storm surge here in the southern part of Southwest Florida.
Absolutely. So that's the unfortunate nature of the geography of Florida. If you look from Tampa all the way through to Bonita Springs, Golden Gate, even further to the south of that, where that last little ticker of the 3 to 6 feet is, if you look, it's oriented northwest to southeast. And if you think about it in terms of the east side wind flow of this system, it's going to be coming out of the southwest and moving northeast for much of the time this system spends to our west. So, on top of that dome of water that we were talking about, the surge itself, just the water level rising, we're also going to have a lot of that just inertia, that momentum, just the mass of this hurricane being pushed right up against that quadrant there. Thankfully, just to the north of Tampa, near Clearwater, and to the north of there, you see how we change the orientation of the coast to more of a southwest to northeast. So, our surge shouldn't be as significant and as abrupt, but then naturally, immediately after that, you can see where we transition from the orange to red. We're back to that northwest, southeast orientation. That's where the storm is going to be bullseyeing and coming ashore fairly rapidly. So that's why for us meteorologists, we like to mention not only the atmospheric science, but then just like the physical mathematics and the physics behind these systems. Because if you boil it down to the very basics, it literally is just a big ball of energy being shoved inland over the United States. And a lot of that naturally is going to bring water and lots of it everywhere. Not only talking rain, but storm surge down at the surface as well.
No question. And the other thing with that too, it's going to be moving so fast. And one of the reasons why it's going to be moving so fast is the same reason that we're not expecting a Charlie and we're not expecting an Ian, where they just go right on into Southwest Florida and then slice up the I-4 corridor. It's all about the synoptic, the upper level pattern here. So we're going to start with this little guy. This is Helene, guess gal, hanging around the Yucatan Channel tonight. This is the model prediction. We have this upper high hanging on the eastern side of Florida. That's the yellow color there, that clockwise flow in the upper levels. That's what has kind of forced Helene to the west a little bit from where it got started, closer to the Cayman Islands and just west of Jamaica. This is the main key right here in the steering. This dip in the jet stream from Minneapolis, so that greenish blue color from the Twin Cities down to Omaha to St. Louis. That is what is lifting the storm up. And in Charlie and Ian, it stayed progressive. It stayed attached to the main flow. And as it pulled it up, it abruptly forced it into Florida. Watch what happens here. This is according to the model forecast. I'm going to take this out in time. And you see the lines get more tightly packed. That's a strengthening storm. But notice it's still attached a little bit here, but this is cutting off from the normal flow, that little bowling ball thing just south of St. Louis. It is kind of reaching and grabbing Helene and just yanking the storm right on into the Big Bend. So that is also going to add insult to injury, because if this is making landfall at 115 and it's moving 20 miles an hour, on the right front side, you have to add 20 miles an hour. So really, we're going to have the potential for 130 plus miles per hour. And that's, again, if the forecast holds on the 115 side. We're going to know a lot more tomorrow morning on the intensity side. And then these things kind of do like a Fujiwara. They kind of dance and pinwheel around that common center, David. And it's kind of a weird thing to happen like that with that upper low. But that is why we're not going to have another Ian, and certainly not Charlie. Charlie was so tiny. That was a mean storm. But that thing could be pushed. I mean,
Was.
you could breathe and you could move Charlie around. It was so tiny.
Exactly. And Jonathan, if you can go back real quick for the viewers to where you saw that upper low beginning to drift south and Helene was strengthening in the eastern Gulf, I just want to show them something, just something that they can do for their own interpretation. If you look here, guys, Jonathan mentioned that the bluish, grayish colors, the darker colors would be the lowering pressure, the lowering heights, and then the orange, the yellow, that's higher pressure and higher heights. If you think about those two pieces, the low near St. Louis and then the ridge that's just to the west of Bermuda, as walls, kind of like a bowling ball, like he said, going down the lane headed towards the pins. If you look to the north of where Helene is and the circles around her center of circulation over Georgia, the Carolinas, Alabama, you have those north to south lines. They're just pointed straight up and down. You could kind of look at this and know, oh yeah, I can see where it's going to go. It's going to follow that gradient. That's going to be the path of least resistance. That's your bowling lane headed towards the pins that are unfortunately positioned near the Big Bend of Florida. But as you can see, it couldn't really go to the right, even if it wanted to, because you have the aisles, if you will, or where you get the gutter balls and it goes down the drain. You don't make any points at all. So it couldn't go to the right. It really can't go to the left. It has nowhere to go but straight up, and that's due north in this case. And I think this is an awesome graphic to help communicate that, and why a lot of us are fairly confident in the track forecast. It's just nailing down the intensity now.
Well, Sid, just looking, it looks like we're down another millibar to 990. So we'll see if that trend continues. We hope it won't. But nonetheless, that is that. Alrighty, guys, that's about all the time we have. We're going to go look over some of the latest data. We're going to update things on clickorlando.com. We're going to have a short update at 10 o'clock tonight. And then at 11 o'clock, tune in to News 6 at 11. If you don't have News 6, if you're outside of the greater Central Florida area, download News 6 Plus. It's free for your smart TV, your Apple TV, Roku, Fire TV, whatever streaming TV services there are these days. And you can watch it there too, because we're going to talk about the latest 11 o'clock advisory. That's going to be big. That's going to be the latest forecast, track, and intensity from the Hurricane Center. And then we're going to go county by county and hit up every single county in Central Florida, in the greater Orlando area, greater Central Florida area, to talk about potential timing and impacts of what we'll see in the peninsula and interior Central Florida. So we want to thank you guys again for hanging out with us tonight. Wish it was under a little better circumstances, but always great talking weather with you guys. Thank you for being a part of us, part of this. If you were joining for the first time or watching for the first time and you're not a subscriber, please do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. We're going to have live coverage on this storm as it comes ashore over the next couple of days and for the rest of hurricane season. And then as we get into winter, it doesn't stop in winter, and we'll see what happens with that if it's another dud again like last year. But that's a story for another time, as we are still certainly tracking some hurricanes, David.
Absolutely, Jonathan. Thank you very much for hosting this once again. And thank you, all viewers out there. Regardless of where you reside from, we're going to be back at it here very soon, crunching numbers, crunching the forecast, and all the data available to us. Stick with New 6, your reliable, trusted weather sources. We get you the results you need in the face of significant weather like this, and we'll see you again very soon. I'll throw you guys a hand salute given the nature of my business up here, and we'll talk again very soon.
Awesome stuff, David. Thanks a lot. Thanks so much for being with us, and have a great night, guys. Stay safe. Listen to your local officials, guys. We'll talk soon. Bye.
Take care.